those of you concerned with the propaganda we see in corporate media were probably alarmed by a now viral video released by Deadspin that's basically a compilation of local broadcasters who are owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, which is a very right-wing company, parroting the same scripted lines, ironically, about bias in the mainstream media. Now, Sinclair never really has been a company that hides their right-wing bias, although it is the case that they certainly deny it publicly. But this video shows the exact fear that a lot of us had with the control of corporate entities over local media. So I'll show you the clip, and then we'll discuss a little bit more about it when we return.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Now that to me, when I saw this, I was taken aback. I watched this video numerous times now in preparation for the segment, and this really feels like we are living in George Orwell's 1984. To see all of these local news anchors parrot the same exact script, it's troubling, because Sinclair, many of its executives are right-wingers. So if they have a script that they want local news anchors to read to you, then those local news anchors, they really have no choice. They have to read you that script. Now, the thing about local news is that Sinclair Broadcasting, as they expand their reach, they are changing the face of local news media. Now, I don't believe that these news anchors got into journalism to simply be stooges for their corporate overlords at Sinclair Broadcasting. So the question is, why wouldn't you quit? And the answer is that Sinclair has a stronghold on them. And when I say they have a stronghold on them, I mean legally. So as Bloomberg explains, the short answer as to why these news anchors can't quit is because the cost may be too steep. According to copies of 2 employment contracts reviewed by Bloomberg, some Sinclair employees were subject to a liquidated damages clause for leaving before the term of their agreement was up, one that requires they pay as much as 40% of their annual compensation to the company. While they were also subject to a 6-month non-compete clause and forced arbitration, 3 current and former Sinclair employees said it was the potential financial penalty that had the greatest impact on those thinking of quitting. And even if you're a Sinclair employee and your contract is nearing its end, finding a new job is really difficult, and certainly finding a job specifically in media, which is, presumably their passion, it's probably even more difficult. So they're kind of stuck, and they're forced to recite whatever their corporate overlords at Sinclair wants. Now, what's funny to me is that mainstream media news outlets, corporate media outlets like CNN and MSNBC, they're being incredibly pretentious about this. They're on their high horse saying that this is really problematic for democracy. It's troubling. It's not journalism. But you guys essentially do the same thing. You may not read scripted lines from, executives at CNN and MSNBC and at Fox News as well, of course, but we all know that you refuse to cover certain topics because you don't want to offend your corporate advertisers. So it may be a different bias, but it's still bias nonetheless. Now, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who lambasts fake news on a daily basis, decided to come to the defense of Sinclair, saying, "So funny to watch fake news networks, among the most dishonest groups of people I have ever dealt with, criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased. Sinclair is far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke." Now, I agree that it is hypocritical for CNN and MSNBC to criticize Sinclair. Fox News has been relatively silent because Fox News obviously has a right-wing bias, so they have no real reason to criticize Sinclair. But it's funny that Donald Trump is the one who's saying this about CNN and calling them hypocrites, because if you purport to care about news media being unbiased, then wouldn't you not defend Sinclair? Well, of course not, because Donald Trump, what he considers fake news is any and all shows in the mainstream media that criticize him. So he's not actually someone who's concerned about objectivity or even neutrality in news reporting. He just wants people to give him favorable coverage. So anyone who gives him negative coverage, he considers fake news. And furthermore, there's a very specific reason why Donald Trump is coming to the defense of Sinclair Broadcasting when clearly they are biased. It's because back in 2016, when Donald Trump was still running to be president, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, actually admitted that they signed a deal with Sinclair to give Donald Trump more favorable coverage. So according to Josh Dawsey and Hottest Gold of Politico, Donald Trump's campaign struck a deal with Sinclair Broadcast Group during the campaign to try and secure better media coverage, his son-in-law Jared Kushner told business executives Friday in Manhattan. In exchange, Sinclair would broadcast their Trump interviews across the country without commentary, Kushner said. But Sinclair and other networks said such a deal is nothing nefarious or new, just an arrangement for extended sit-down interviews with both candidates, one many campaigns have done in previous years to get around the national media and directly to viewers in key states.
Stop fucking lying.
I think news should be objective. They should report the objective facts. But they're not doing this, and by forming this deal, certainly that biases Sinclair's coverage of Donald Trump. Now, Sinclair Broadcasting, it's really no surprise that they are a right-wing company. A lot of us have known this previously, but a lot more people are finding out just how biased they are, and they have a history of being a biased right-wing company. As Alex Kaplan of Media Matters explains, Sinclair and its affiliates have a history of airing conservative-leaning reporting and commentary, and its executives have donated to Republicans and Republican causes. The company also has ties to President Donald Trump and his administration, covered him very favorably during his presidential campaign, and hired one of his former aides as an analyst. And in a meta-analysis regarding coverage of Sinclair, Kaplan explains how a Washington local news affiliate, once it was purchased by Sinclair Broadcasting, this affiliate, WJLA-TV, took a subtle but noticeable turn to the right. The Post added that Sinclair's stations have been used to attack Democratic candidates or to boost Republicans, and according to a 2017 article from the New York Times, they became noticeably more right-wing during the Bush years by refusing to broadcast a Nightline documentary that listed the names of American soldiers killed in action in Bush's Iraq War, and they also aired segments from a documentary that criticized John Kerry for protesting the Vietnam War when he was younger, and they also refused to air audio evidence that Montanan Republican candidate Greg Gianforte body-slammed a journalist, and this is perhaps because a Sinclair executive literally contributed to his campaign. Now, there's also been numerous reports about Sinclair executives generally just being pro-Trump. So make no mistake about it, this is a right-wing company, and even though they deny that they are biased in favor of Republicans, they really don't do that good of a job hiding their bias. Now, to make matters worse, Ajit Pai, FCC chairman, you might have heard of him, he repealed net neutrality against the overwhelming majority of the American people. He went to great lengths to actually expand the reach of Sinclair by making regulatory changes that specifically benefit Sinclair. And in fact, he was so brazen in assisting Sinclair that he's now under investigation by internal watchdogs within the FCC for corruption and potential collusion with Sinclair. As the New York Times' Cecilia King reports, last April, the chairman chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, led the charge for his agency to approve rules allowing television broadcasters to greatly increase the number of stations they own. A few weeks later, Sinclair Broadcasting announced a blockbuster $3.9 billion deal to buy Tribune Media, a deal those new rules made possible. By the end of the year, in a previously undisclosed move, the top internal watchdog for the FCC opened an investigation into whether Mr. Pai and his aides had improperly pushed for the rule changes and whether they had timed them to benefit Sinclair, according to Representatives Frank Pallone of New Jersey and 2 congressional aides. Now, why is it that Ajit Pai, a Republican, would do everything in his power to make regulatory changes that allow Sinclair Broadcasting to buy Tribune Media and expand their reach? Well, it's of course because Sinclair provides Republicans and right-wingers with favorable coverage. So why wouldn't the Republican Party come to the defense like Donald Trump did? Why wouldn't they make regulatory changes to help expand the reach of Sinclair when Sinclair does the bidding of the Republican Party because its executives are right-wingers who not only donate to Republican causes and the Republican Party directly, but they're just generally pro-Republican and pro-Trump. So this is the problem. When you have corporate-owned media, this is what we get. So it's no shocker that we see Orwellian news segments where news anchors are simply reading scripts provided to them by rich right-wingers who are the executives of the company that owns them, owns who they work for. It's no surprise. This is what you get. And it's incredibly frustrating, and there's not much we can really do in the short term. But what we can do as citizens, as responsible citizens, is arm ourselves with knowledge and know what the agenda is of each of these companies that own the media outlets that we see. Because if they own the media outlets that we see, they control the narrative, and by proxy, they control how we view the news and political issues. So certainly, stay vigilant and know what you're watching when you tune in to media you see on TV.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.